So my next guest is someone whose work I've secretly come to admire. He's put out some prospect threads during the draft that had me rethinking some of my early projections. So I always like learning from people in the community, and this guy is no different. My man is a dynasty writer for Yards Per Fantasy, the Sports Gambling Podcast Network, the Dynasty Mafia Podcast Network. In addition to his writing, he's also co-host of the Fantasy Football Playmakers Podcast and Smash Accept Podcast as well. My man Jeremy, welcome to the show, brother.
Hey, welcome. I'm happy to be on. I appreciate the opportunity to come on here and talk some Buffalo Bills football here with you. But like you'd mentioned, yeah, you can find me on Twitter at PopesFFH, and you can find any of my work over at yardsperfantasy.com. And the Sports Gambling Podcast Network is where most of it is. And like you had mentioned, I'm on Smash Accept as like a kind of like a contributor there. Not every podcast, but some of them. And then my own podcast, which is the Fantasy Football Playmakers.
Yeah, man, definitely well-rounded right there. I know you do a lot of dynasty content as well, and so we're gonna look at things from a little bit of a redraft perspective, but obviously mixing some dynasty in as well. But as you mentioned, we're talking about the Buffalo Bills today, continuing our divisional breakdowns, going on with the AFC East. We did the NFC East last week, so make sure you check that out. But this week, as we go on to do the AFC East, Jeremy, we look at these Buffalo Bills, fourth season under Sean McDermott. Last year, they end up going 13-3 all the way to the AFC Championship game, where they fall just short against the Kansas City Chiefs. Bills fans, though, have to be feeling good about this team, I would imagine. I mean, having high expectations for the team in 2021, you must feel really good about it, as well as when you consider the long-term answer. You have the long-term answer at both quarterback and head coach, it seems. So, Jeremy, what's the expectation for 2021? How are Bills fans feeling as we head into this 2021 NFL season?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not crazy to say that the Bills 2021, every fan here is basically thinking Super Bowl or bust. I mean, last year getting to the AFC Championship game and the heartbreak of watching the Chiefs just kind of obliterate us to an extent definitely hurt. And I think that even you could see in the offseason, Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott kind of addressed what was a glaring issue in that game. And like they went defensive heavy and offensive line heavy in the draft. And I think that this year they're just hoping to have a little bit better of an edge rush, and they're just going to drop back and be the same team they were last year. I think they're going to come with a pass heavy attack. And I mean, they want to probably run the ball a touch more. I think they want to get a little effective there. However, I just don't see it being like their main focal point. I still think it's going to be really pass heavy and lean on Josh Allen and this passing attack. So I think for the Bills and all fans here, I can speak pretty confidently saying that it's Super Bowl or bust for us.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely would have to agree there. I mean, after making, the strides that you guys made last year as a team, and getting all the way to the AFC Championship game, it has to be Super Bowl or bust. I mean, you guys are the only. I mean, Baltimore has had their struggles with the Chiefs, but when you look at the teams in the AFC that match up, that can go toe to toe with Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs, it's got to be the Buffalo Bills, led by their young stallion and Josh Allen. He had a phenomenal 2020 season, notching career highs in nearly every passing category. People used to talk about, yours included, could not complete over 60% of his passes. Well, he smashed that, 69.2% of his passes last year, 4,544 passing yards, 37 passing touchdowns to go along with just 10 interceptions. That's the second lowest total of his career. He was a threat on the ground, though not as he had been in previous years, but I mean, we'll take that with the passing production, right? He had 421 rushing yards, did have 8 touchdowns on the ground, was the QB2 last year in terms of fantasy points per game, 24.8 fantasy points per game, going off the board right now as the QB2 behind Mahomes, just ahead of Kyler Murray. Any reason to believe that Josh Allen can't repeat what he did last year?
I think there is one small reason. I think that I see personally, even as a Bills fan, a slight regression. I don't know if he can finish as like a QB 1 or 2 this year. I just think it's not even partially his skill set. I think it's going to come down to a scheme, like I'd mentioned there in the intro. I think they want to run the ball a little bit more. I think they want to not take Josh Allen's legs out of his game, but I think they want to use in the red zone. I think they want to use Zach Moss a little more. I think they want to get that run game going. And I just can see a slight regression in his rushing touchdowns, which, depending on your league format, that's 6 points right there. If they start taking those out, I could see him dropping a little bit. He's definitely still going to be top 5. I can't see him dropping any further than that. I just feel, some guys getting a little healthy again, like Dak Prescott could be up there this year, and possibly Lamar Jackson again. I think he just had a down year. So I just see that Allen, as far as a end of the year finishing, I could see him being a little bit lower than what he was last year. But I still think that mid-20s is per game is definitely reachable.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely hear what you're saying with the rushing touchdowns with Zach Moss. I think it does seem though when Buffalo gets down there that their best option is just letting Josh Allen go, because then it becomes a numbers game. You've got this big quarterback. You can just use 10 blockers, and now you're adding an extra body in the run game, and Josh Allen is big enough, mobile enough, that he can, jump over the pile if he has to, or dive underneath it, or get to the edge, but even then, I think he's developed so much as a passer where that he's always has this upside. He's always going to have this weekly upside. But to your point though, getting more balance in this run game, Allen was the entire Bills offense last year. He accounted for 24% of the Bills rushing yards. That was good for top 5, top 6 in the league last year amongst quarterbacks. Allen was at some point did seem like he was the entire offense for the Bills, so much to the point that the Bills, almost didn't run the ball at times unless it was with Allen. Singletary of the running backs was the lead carry getter, had 956 yards from scrimmage, but only had 2 touchdowns. That's kind of been the MO on him. He's great in between the 20s, but he's not going to get you any touchdowns. And then Moss is the bigger back, but he dealt with some high ankle sprain issues last year, was able to get to 576 yards from scrimmage, most of that coming by way of rushing, to go along with 4 rushing touchdowns. They were both almost unusable at times last year to fantasy managers, RB 42 and 54 respectively. Their ADPs are quite forgiving though. Singletary going off the board as the RB 45, Moss going off the board as the RB 39. Do either of these guys present a value to you?
Yeah, I think of either of them, I think we're going to side, depending on your league format. If you're playing PPR, I think I want Devin Singletary as he's not going to be your top 2 backs. He's probably going to be a flex play, a guy you can plug in every now and then, or the injury to Zach Moss happens and he's more of like the lead guy there. If you're going more of a standard format and even possibly PPR, I mean, Zach Moss is going to give you those touchdowns, which are definitely king in fantasy football. And I believe that high ankle sprain definitely affected him all year. I think that it happened early in the season. He missed 3 games. And then you saw at the end of the year, though, Zach Moss started getting more of the carries, more of the touches. And I think both these backs were decently effective. I just think that Zach Moss is not going to see the target share if you're in a PPR league to possibly really push him over the top. But he did see 36% of the rushing share inside the 20, which actually led the team. He was then obviously second, as you mentioned and alluded to earlier, was Josh Allen. So for a guy that I'm looking for upside here, because where they're going, you're going to be looking for a guy who possibly could hit. It's going to be Zach Moss, I feel. I'm hoping it's Devin Singletary, but I think he's going to be kind of more used in the passing game, like I'd mentioned. So I don't see his touchdowns really getting there to get him upper into that close to RB2 range. I think he's got a low end RB3 this year, and I think Moss has the potential to get to that low RB2 if he can take over the whole backfield, almost more so where it's like a 55-45 split. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, definitely. Going into last year, especially here on this show. I mean, my co-host Greg Penniman, who will join us, as we get closer to the regular season, he was really high on Zach Moss. I wasn't necessarily really high on him. It was just when you look at him compared to Devin Singletary, I see a back that's big. I see a back that, naturally can earn that first and second down work, can also get those touchdown opportunities. But Zach Moss was also a guy that had 66 career college receptions. So he was a guy that was able to catch the football, had experience doing it. And so when you see a big back who has the ability to not be just a first and second down back, but also get those touchdowns, but then also catch the football, that almost kind of leads you to that three down back role. And so I think, to your point, if Zach Moss can overtake that from Devin Singletary, and then overtake some of those touchdowns from Josh Allen, then yes, I think we do have a high end RB2 on our hands. Somewhere within in the low to mid 20s.
Yeah, and I mean, you can even look at their numbers last year. They were fairly close in the passing game. I mean, Devin Singletary had more opportunities. He was targeted almost more than double. However, Zach Moss in his 18 targets was 14 receptions, 95 yards, and he averaged 6.8. So it's not like he was like a slouch there. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, Devin Singletary was 38 receptions for 269, and it was 7.1 per. So, I mean, he's not creating all that much more in the passing game. I
Mm-hmm.
think it's just they trusted him a little bit more as a blocker on third down. But if you watch, as me, obviously watching their games every Sunday, they like to rotate them. So it's like once they're in the red zone, it's obviously Zach Moss's time. But even in between the 20s, at times they'll go series after series. So it'll be Zach Moss on the opening series. The next series, it's Devin Singletary. They just kind of like to rotate them and keep them fresh. So that's where Zach Moss is also going to possibly be able to see more receiving than we think, at least at the moment. Because if they just keep that pattern where it's one series is Moss, one series is Singletary, you don't really know. And I think that the Bills are hoping that this offensive line meshes a little better and creates a better run game. And if that happens, I mean, both of these guys, I think Zach Moss is the best potential, but I think one of them could easily jump into, like you had said, that 20 range there and the RBs for this season.
Yeah, definitely. All right, man. Let's move on to the wide receiver position, where I think this team gets a little bit more exciting, especially when you start with the wide receiver one. Stephon Diggs was seen as a guy that would suffer from a quarterback downgrade, moving from Minnesota to Buffalo. That narrative was beat to death by many analysts, including this guy right here. Um, Diggs and Allen showed instant chemistry, though. Diggs led the NFL in 100 in targets with 166, receptions with 127, yards with 1,535. Also had a 76.5 catch rate to go along with 8 touchdowns. This was all good enough for him to finish as the wide receiver 3 in PPR points per game, averaging 20 and a half PPR points per game. Currently going off as the wide receiver 3. Again, all this ADP data is according to 4for4's aggregated ADP data. Where do you see Diggs finishing this year?
I see him right in about that same spot. I mean, the fact that Diggs came over and they produced this season on a shortened COVID off season, and like you'd mentioned, this chemistry was instant. And Josh Allen trusts Stephon Diggs. He's his guy. He saw 30% of the targets last year, and it didn't matter if he was double covered, single covered. I mean, either he was beating guys or he was covered. Josh Allen's going to give him that shot, like we had mentioned. He's not afraid to throw the ball, and I just think that Diggs is his guy, and he's going to target him as much as he can. And it's not just that he is schemed to be the main target, as you mentioned. He's the wide receiver 1 on the team. And I just see Stephon Diggs' talent is just so immense, and his ability to get open and create separation. He's literally open almost every single play. And Josh Allen has taken that step, and he will make those throws, and he gets them on target. And you'd alluded to it. I mean, he has 76% catch percentage last year, and I think he can easily carry that over this year. You could see I could see possibly a dip in the overall targets just based on an offensive scheme if they do get a little bit more run heavy. But I still think top 5 is easy for Stephon Diggs. I don't know if he'll get to wide receiver 1 or 3 again this year. I just think some other guys around him, I think just based on the way I look at the landscape of the NFL at this moment and their opportunities as well, I think it's going to be tough. I think it's a really crowded top 10 there for a lot of these receivers. So I think I'm safe to say top 5. But 3 is a little bit of a stretch in my opinion this year.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be dependent on some things, right? Devontae Adams, right? His situation's up in the air, depending on what happens with Aaron Rodgers. Because to me, Devontae would be my wide receiver 1 if you told me that Aaron Rodgers was coming back, right?
For sure.
If not, right, I have Tyreek Hill 1. I actually have Diggs at 2. Um, and I guess me and you are, I guess we differ in that I think that they're going to continue to throw the ball because, I just Josh Allen to me just seems like why not just have your best player just be involved in every single play. But you know what, it makes sense to try to be more balanced and maybe they try to take that balance to not just the play calling, but the distribution of the passes as well. So, who is the wide receiver 2 going to be on this roster? John Brown no longer in town. Cole Beasley returns after seeing 107 targets, which he turned into 82 catches for almost 1,000 yards and 4 touchdowns. Good enough for wide receiver 31 with 13.8 PPR points per game. Gabriel Davis targeted 62 times, which he was able to convert into 35 catches for almost 600 yards, just a yard short of 600, 7 touchdowns, which was good enough for 8.6 PPR points per game and wide receiver 74 finish. And then they also signed Emmanuel Sanders, who finishes the wide receiver 43 with the Saints with almost 12 PPR points per game. These guys are going off the board wide receiver 54, 61, and 67, respectively. Do any of these guys present a value, and which one of them are you targeting for your redraft teams this season?
I'm going after Cole Beasley. I love Cole Beasley at his ADP. I think that's a steal. I think this guy has top 24 potential just in this pure offense. He's proven to be a safety blanket for Josh Allen. He saw 20% of the targets last year. And you figure, like you'd mentioned, John Brown's leaving. You figure he had about 9% last year, mainly due to injury. However, I think I can see them, like you'd mentioned, possibly evening this out a little bit. But even with that 20%, you'd mentioned that Beasley had a great year last year. He's a security blanket for Josh Allen. He's another guy that just is great at creating separation, is almost open every single play. And Josh Allen is being able to step back there, take his time, and find the open guy. And if it's not, the checkdowns Josh is Cole Beasley. And Beasley in PPR leagues is an absolute steal at what you'd mentioned was 51, I think you said, right?
Yeah, according to 4for4, they got him
Yeah,
going off to 54.
54. That's a guy who has, like I said, low end top 24 potential, easily wide receiver 3 upside. But I think Gabe Davis could make a push this year. He came on late last year. He looked really good in the playoffs. He's a big body receiver, something that they don't have in the rest of the wide receiver group, at least of the top 3 that we're talking about here. And I just feel that he has a decent amount of talent. He kind of slipped in the draft. I thought last year he came out as definitely a surprise for a lot of people. But he was, as you mentioned, he had 7 touchdowns in which he probably could have easily had 10 to 11. I know of 3 off the top of my head that he dropped. So, and they weren't even hard catches. He just kind of lost concentration and just dropped them. So he cleans a little bit of that up. And you could see a guy with double-digit touchdowns this year if they repeat what they did last year, which was up in the upper 40s of touchdowns. So, it's tough, but I really like Cole Beasley. I just think he's a safer option, and especially at that ADP. But Gabe Davis definitely is a guy, too, also with that late ADP. If you can, I'm trying to grab both of them because I think any of these wide receivers, honestly, all 3 could be very fantasy viable in redraft and or dynasty, just purely as wide receiver 3 range.
Yeah, I think that when you look at this offense and kind of how it operated last year, all 3 of Beasley, Diggs, and even John Brown were able to coexist, right? Diggs was that every week target, Beasley was the safe floor play where he would blow up if he got a touchdown, and then John Brown was that flyer that you would take, as a wide receiver three during bye weeks or in a high shootout or something like that. And I don't think that there's any reason for that to change much, right? Gabriel Davis, he got a lot of his opportunities last year when guys like John Brown and Cole Beasley were injured. So I think that this kind of just sets up perfectly for him. Gabe Davis is kind of the guy that I want. I mean, I like these big physical wide receivers. I mean, he's not going to be the alpha on this team, but when you just look at a guy that, at 6'2", average 17 yards a catch, had a 56.5% catch rate, which, when you're looking at a guy who's being targeted down the field like he is, I think that's pretty impressive. And then pair him with a big armed quarterback in Josh Allen that's actually become a quarterback now. I think there's a ton of upside here with Gabriel Davis. So he's the guy I'm taking at. I mean, me personally taking at this price point just because those I want those boom weeks out of him. But Cole Beasley definitely is a value here. Finished as wide receiver 3 last year, and that was obviously him dealing with some injuries. He's basically the extension of this run game. He's free points in PPR leagues between 6 to 7 targets on a weekly basis. So yeah, I mean both of these guys are values. All right, let's move on to the tight end position. So Dawson Knox finished as the tight end 33 last year, averaged 5.6 PPR points per game in 12 games, only had 24 catches for 288 yards and 3 touchdowns. Going off the board is a tight end 32. Is there any value here, or are we just leaving Knox to the wayside?
For me, I'm kind of out, especially in a redraft with Dawson Knox. I mean, depending on where you can get him, if he's a guy that really falls in your drafts, which how the tight end landscape is. If I go probably like a 0 tight end type strategy and it's late in the draft, he could have some upside to him. He did miss some time last year, and on his season pace, he would have seen more targets and more production than he did in his rookie season. However, they just don't really target the tight end that much in this offense. He's not a big field stretcher type of guy. He almost runs in that same like yardage territory as Cole Beasley. And I just feel like Josh is finding Cole quicker because Beasley's either open sooner or just Dawson Knox isn't open. He doesn't really create great separation. So he's definitely physical after the catch and he can make some plays. He just, like I said, he's just not the main focus in this. And like you had alluded to earlier, where you saw 3 wide receivers who were viable, and offenses that you see that, you usually see the tight end is not as crazily fantasy viable. And I just don't see it here. He could be a flex play at times if your lead tight end got hurt, maybe a waiver wire target in redraft, because I'm sure he'll go mostly undrafted in a lot of these leagues just because he didn't really make that step last year. And I think they brought in Jacob Hollister too, who's proven that he can kind of be a receiving threat. So I think it's just up in the air, and I'm just not in on Dawson Knox this year. So
yeah, I mean, I think it's hard to be in on him from a redraft perspective, and when there's all these tight ends available to you, like you said, waiver wire pick them up during bye weeks or injuries or something like that. From a dynasty perspective, I have more Dawson Knox than I'm probably willing to admit, just because I do take a little bit of a 0 tight end approach in dynasty leagues, and so I'm in that range where I'm just scooping up like Chris Herndon, Harrison Bryant, and Dawson Knox, and just one of you guys are gonna stick.
Our rosters probably look a lot very similar then, because I'm pretty much the same. I'm just sitting there waiting for like guys like that, Herndon, Knox, Troutman, like the late guys that Gerald Everett that might hit, instead of wasting my first or second on Waller or any of them. But it just seems like I would probably take Waller them early, but it just people take them before me, so exactly. Before where I want to go. So
that's exactly what it's like. I would take them. They just go earlier than I would be willing to take them.
By the time it makes the 4th round turn, they're all gone, and I'm like, ooh. All right, guys.
By the way, I mean, mind you, Kyle Pitts went in like the 2nd round.
Oh yeah.
Oh man. All right. Jeremy, this was fun, but before I let you go, one last question for you. Uh, how do you see this? I feel like I already know because it should be easy, but how do you see this division breaking down? Where are the Buffalo Bills finishing?
Yeah, I mean, obviously going to be a little bit of a homer here. I think they win the division. I found out the other day, a couple weeks ago, actually, probably now, but that Vegas has the Bills at like over under a 10. That just seems really surprising to me. I'm guessing they think the Patriots or the Dolphins are going to be a lot better than they are. But I definitely think it's probably going to go Bills, Dolphins, Patriots, Jets. Sorry, not to throw shots at your Jets team, but
Hey,
I think
man.
they're going in the right direction. I think they got it. They got Robert Saleh. I like so. Zach Wilson definitely has some good upside, and they brought in a lot of talent for him this year. So they could be a surprise team. I just don't know if they're going to make that step. So
Yeah, no, I mean it's definitely not reason. It's definitely reasonable to think that they'll finish fourth in the division, and I think it's reasonable to think the Bills will finish first. That's actually my pick as well. I have the Buffalo Bills winning this division, and the Patriots second, the Dolphins third. Basically, how you have it. So yeah, so no, it's going to be exciting, at least for you. I hope it doesn't
it's been
end
a
in the
long
Super
time.
I hope it doesn't end in the Super Bowl, but you know what? Like I know that you're obviously hoping for different things, but no love lost, Jeremy. I definitely appreciate your time, man. You're a wonderful guest, and everybody, um, make sure you're following Jeremy. Make sure you're following his content, Jeremy. Why don't you just plug your stuff one more time so everybody knows where to find you?
Yeah, for sure. You can find me on Twitter at PopesFFH. Any questions or anything, you can DM them open or over. I'm always open to answering anything. But yeah, you can find any of my writing, rankings, any of that stuff, usually at yardsperfantasy.com and or the Sports Gambling Podcast Network.
Well, you heard that. Make sure you go follow Jeremy at Popes FFH, and make sure you check out his content, his writing, and his podcast. And hopefully, you guys enjoyed it. And we'll talk to y'all later.